You're standing in a familiar place. Maybe your kitchen late at night. Maybe your car before you turn the key. The day is done. The tasks are handled. There's no urgency left. And yet you don't reach for anyone. Your phone stays where it is. Not because there's no one to contact, but because nothing feels necessary to say. You've already figured things out. You always do. You lean against the counter or rest your head back for a moment and let the quiet settle. It's calm. It's controlled. It's also strangely empty. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to notice. You're good at being alone. You know how to fill space with movement, with thought, with competence. You've learned how to meet your own needs without making a mess of them. If something breaks, you fix it. If something hurts, you manage it. If something feels heavy, you carry it discreetly. There's a certain pride in this, and a certain relief. Relying on yourself means fewer disappointments, fewer misunderstandings, fewer moments where you have to explain why something matters to you. So you become efficient with your inner life. You sort things out quietly. You process quickly. You don't linger too long on what can't be changed. People might describe you as strong, independent, grounded, and they wouldn't be wrong. But strength has layers, and one of them is very quiet. It's the layer where you realize that being capable doesn't mean being accompanied. You don't talk about this much, not because it's forbidden, but because it feels unnecessary. You've learned not to expect anyone to fully meet you there. So instead, you show up as the one who doesn't need much. You listen more than you speak. You help more than you ask. You carry yourself in a way that says, "I've got it." And most of the time you do. But every now and then, in the space between tasks, or in the stillness before sleep, there's a sense of being slightly unseen. Not misunderstood. Not abandoned. Just alone with your own competence. This didn't come from nowhere. Self-sufficiency often begins as a response, not a personality trait. At some point, you notice that waiting didn't help. That explaining took more energy than it returned. That depending felt uncertain. So you learn to anticipate your own needs, to answer your own questions, to become reliable to yourself. This wasn't about shutting people out. It was about staying steady. You discovered that if you didn't ask, you wouldn't be disappointed. If you didn't lean, you wouldn't fall. If you didn't expect too much, you'd rarely be let down. And over time, this approach worked. You became the one who holds things together, the one others turn to, the one who stays calm when things unravel. There's a quiet respect that comes with that role, and a quiet distance too. Because when you are known as the capable one, people assume you don't need company in your uncertainty. They don't check in as often. They trust that you'll handle it. And you reinforce that assumption, not intentionally, but consistently. You answer, "I'm fine," before the question has fully landed. You change the subject when it drifts toward you. You don't want to burden anyone with something you can manage yourself. This becomes a loop. The less you ask, the less people offer. The less people offer, the more you rely on yourself. Not out of bitterness, out of habit. There's a particular loneliness in this, one that doesn't come from lack of connection, but from lack of being met. You can be surrounded by people and still feel singular in your experience. You can be loved and still feel privately responsible for everything you feel. Because self-sufficiency isn't just about doing things alone. It's about not expecting to be held in the middle of them. And expectation is something you learn to minimize. You learn to keep your emotional weight balanced carefully, never tipping too far outward. You became skilled at containment. This skill protected you. It still does. But it also shapes the way closeness feels. When someone offers help, you might hesitate, not because you don't want it, but because you don't know where to place it. When someone asks how you are, you might answer honestly but selectively. Only the parts that won't require follow-up. Not because you're hiding, because you've learned to be efficient with vulnerability. You've learned which parts of yourself are easy to carry alone and which parts feel awkward to share. So you keep the heavier things folded inward. There's a moment, subtle but telling, when you realize that no one knows certain things about you. Not because you're secretive, but because no one ever needed to. You managed without witnesses. That realization can land softly or sharply, depending on the day. Sometimes it feels like freedom, other times like distance. And it's important to say this clearly. There is nothing wrong with being self-sufficient. It's a form of intelligence, a response to environments where reliability had to come from within. But it's not the same as not needing connection. Even the most capable people still carry an unspoken wish, not to be rescued, but to be accompanied. To have someone sit beside them without needing them to perform strength. To be seen without being evaluated. To share weight without turning it into a transaction. This wish doesn't mean you failed at independence. It means you're human. Sometimes, being self-sufficient creates a strange paradox. The more capable you are, the less permission you feel to need. The less permission you feel to need, the more isolated you become, not externally but internally. You may not feel lonely in the traditional sense. You might not crave attention or reassurance. But there can be a quiet ache for resonance. For someone to recognize not just what you do, but how it feels to do it alone. This ache isn't urgent. It doesn't demand action. It simply waits. And often it waits beneath layers of competence, humor, productivity, and composure. Understanding this doesn't require you to change anything. It doesn't mean you need to suddenly ask for more, or soften your edges, or become someone you're not. It simply invites you to notice the cost of always being the one who holds. Notice how rarely you let yourself rest into someone else's presence without managing the space. Notice how quickly you move to reassurance when someone worries about you. Notice how unfamiliar it feels to be supported without explanation. These observations aren't accusations. They're acknowledgments. They say, this pattern made sense. It still makes sense. And now you're allowed to be curious about it. Curiosity is gentle. It doesn't push. It might sound like, what would it be like to let someone know a little more? Or, what part of me assumes I have to handle this alone? You don't have to act on these questions. You don't owe them answers. Awareness alone changes the texture of experience. When you realize that your self-sufficiency is a strategy, not an identity, something loosens. You're still capable, still grounded, still independent, but you're no longer defined solely by how much you can carry. You might start to notice moments where connection is offered quietly, not dramatically, just presence. Someone listening without fixing. Someone staying without needing you to be strong. Someone sharing space without expectation. And you may notice how your body responds, a slight hesitation, a subtle relief, a quiet uncertainty. That response is information, not instruction. It tells you where your edges are, where your habits live, where your independence has been working overtime. You don't need to push past those edges. You don't need to dismantle them. Sometimes, simply knowing they exist is enough. Because knowing gives you choice. You can remain self-sufficient. And you can also allow moments of shared weight when they feel right. Not because you need to, but because you're allowed to. There's no rule that says strength must be solitary. No requirement that competence excludes connection. You didn't become self-sufficient to be alone. You became self-sufficient to survive. And survival patterns deserve respect, not erasure. If you sit with this understanding for a moment, notice what happens inside. No need to analyze. Just notice. The loneliness of self-sufficiency isn't a failure of character. It's a quiet side effect of resilience. And resilience can coexist with tenderness. Not forced, not performed, just acknowledged. If reflections like this stay with you, let them be companions, not conclusions. They're here to offer perspective, not direction. You don't need to fix your independence. You don't need to give it up. You only need to understand it. And in that understanding, there's space. Space to breathe. Space to feel less alone with your strength. You're not wrong for carrying what you've carried. And you're not weak for noticing the weight. Both can be true. So let yourself pause here just briefly. In the quiet recognition that your self-sufficiency has a story, and that story makes sense. Nothing about you needs to change for that to be true. And that understanding on its own is already a kind of company,